What the Tech is brought to you by ButcherBox. To receive $10 off plus free bacon for life, go to butcherbox.com and click on the big bacon banner on the homepage and enter Andrew10 at checkout. Go now, limited time offer. Slack is a messaging app which brings together all your team's communication into one place, making work simpler and more productive. Go to slack.com to learn more.
What's the tech?
Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian, and let me just say, I absolutely hate this intro that we play at the beginning of the show. It's way too long. The music is so abrupt. It terrifies me when I hear it. So I just want to say I need to get rid of this intro. So this week will be the last time you ever hear that. I'm promising you that at this point. By the way, I'm joined by Mr. Paul Thurrott. How do you, Paul?
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
It's funny you mentioned the music because I don't mind this music. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I often, walking around in the world when I listen to these things with my headsets, will begin yelling at these people because of the terribleness of the music that I hear on podcasts. And then there'll be those podcasts that have like a segment somewhere in the show, and they actually fire up a 30-second, a guy talking in a day when blah, blah, blah. And it's like,
Yeah.
they think it's the coolest thing in the world. And it's like, guys, you're just wasting my time.
I had a meeting. I had a meeting with a major network, right? Radio brand. They're known for radio, but they've expanded into podcasts. And this was a couple days ago, and we were talking about how to deliver ads.
Please.
Can I may or may not work with them because I really like them, but their guidance on certain things is kind of off. So they were talking to me. They're like, so what do you suggest with ads? Like, they were talking about how to deliver ads and all this stuff. I'm like, listen, man. He's like, do we have to make it like interesting for digital where we have to have the production? I'm like, how do you do it on radio? Well, we have a 30-second spot or a 60-second. I said, perfect. That's all you need to do.
Yep.
And how about
why
this?
are you overthinking this?
This was the best thing. I go, listen, I know you guys have a couple reads. You guys do live reads. That's how it works. I still do live reads with my ads. Why don't you get the guy, the host or host, whoever it is, to do an organic read? Forget about the copy. Obviously, you hit the points, but talk about it. Like, from your own experience. He goes, we can't do that. That's asking a lot of them. I go, that's a job. So pretty much what he told me was the hosts really don't care about the ads that they have. And they're just reading it just to get it by. I'm like, you know what? That's the difference between podcasts, because most podcasts that I listen to actually give a crap about their advertisers, and they actually use their ads and they use their products.
That could change, by the way. I think the reason that is because there's a nice symbiosis right now between the types of companies that advertise on podcasts, the types of people that host podcasts. It just kind of works out. Like,
Yeah.
I still go on and on about Audible, even though we haven't done an Audible ad in years probably or whatever. Like, I actually use Audible every day. Like, they're kind of a perfect company.
It's harmonious for us to talk about it. Listen, last week we spoke about Molecule, the air purifier. I actually have it, and I absolutely love it because my house is a disaster right now. So it was a great segue to talk about the product. It was an interesting conversation. Maybe we could save this for like a different show where we talk about the differences between content.
Can we
and
save
how
it
it's
for a different
changing.
show where we talk about our feelings?
Yeah, we could. Actually, talk about my feelings. A lot of hurt feelings, probably. Did you vote? A lot of people are.
I did.
Everybody's so upset over this voting thing. By the way, your sticker sucks. Have you seen ours in New York? Look at this. Look how
Yours
cool
looks
that is.
It looks like a map of the subway or something.
I believe
is
that's
this
what it is.
inclusive color scheme.
That's what it is. It's inclusive. And I got two of them. The lady gave me two because she said I was handsome.
Wow.
Yeah, she gave me two stickers. That counts as voting twice, so that could be considered voter fraud, right? Is that how it works?
Sure. Of course, it would
sticker,
happen
one
in
vote?
New York's kind of a deep blue state, wouldn't you say?
the deep as what is the bluest of blues?
The deep north.
Yeah. Deep. Yeah, I went and I voted. I saw that you voted. Your sticker sucks. It was. I have to
Listen,
tell you,
I come from a state where voter suppression occurs, so the fact that they even allowed me to vote. Actually, I don't even have proof of this. I handed them a card back. They probably just gave it to someone else and let them vote right over me.
I have to tell you, regardless of what the outcomes are, and politics aside, it's great to see so many people are actually going and voting because especially for like
Yeah,
midterms,
it's
voter
too bad that a
turnout is terrible.
freaking national disaster had to happen to get anyone to get off their asses and
Listen,
vote.
there's
But
always a
yeah,
reason. There's always a
mm,
reason.
we
Hopefully, it
need
leads to
compulsory
positivity.
voting in this country.
That's what we need.
I'm not joking. There are places that do that.
Um,
You have to participate.
yeah, listen, or you get stoned. That's just how it works, right?
Yeah,
Certain
you can go to
countries, I'm sure.
Australia.
Yeah, they ship you to Australia.
Yeah.
Guys, we do have a lot to talk about today. Last week was the Apple event. We did it right after the Apple event, so a lot of it was just raw emotion of what we saw, and I those are my favorite shows when we actually see something, when we give our actual reaction to it. But I did
I
get a
like
lot
to.
of feedback about
Can
this,
we
and
go
I did
back over
see.
everything again? Seriously, I wouldn't mind
No,
doing that.
do you really?
No. Yeah.
Okay,
Quickly. I don't mean like spend 45 minutes on it,
okay,
but I
fine.
mean, I think that's an interesting point because when the dust settles, sometimes your opinion changes a little bit or your perspective on something. I think it might be worth just quickly,
No, it is,
looking
and
at them.
and the reason why is I really wanted to touch on the fact that the iPad Pro
Yeah.
was really, and obviously I saw it and I noticed it, but I didn't really comment on this. It was very aggressively pushed as a PC this
Right.
time around.
It's true.
I mean that's really what it was. Um, it was really pushed as a PC, especially with the pricing, right? $1,500 for for a certain
Especially yeah,
model.
that's a good point.
So I do want to touch on that a little bit, obviously, and talk about a couple other things. But before we continue, I want to talk about our great sponsor, and that's ButcherBox. I was just telling Paul how I'm going to cook some steak right after this because my kitchen is
You can't stop
90%
talking about
complete.
it.
My kitchen is 90% complete. I got a new cast iron skillet. I prepped the steak, and this is the great thing about ButcherBox. So I a couple months ago they sent over a box of just curated different types of meat. It was, I think I got steak, I got pork, I got chicken, all organic, which is phenomenal, obviously for a number of reasons, right? But here was a cool thing. So the way that it comes is that you could choose from a curated box that includes high quality beef, chicken, pork, or you could customize your box. So meaning, if you don't really eat beef, guess what? You could just get the chicken. If you don't like chicken, you could just get the beef. The meat is frozen at peak freshness in an individual vacuum sealed bag. It's biodegradable packaging, and it's shipped to your door. And this was the best thing. So I was talking to somebody, and they asked me, how do they know? Like, they ship it to your door and they put the dry ice in there, right? And they leave it there. Let's say you're not there. What happens?
Right.
They actually calculate the amount of dry ice to use for the location that you're living in. So if you live in New York or if you live in Arizona, you'll have a different amount of dry ice because they know, for it to stay at your doorstep for X amount of hours, they know what it takes for that area, which is pretty cool. So the way that this works, you select what you want. You get the grass-fed and grass-finished beef, free-range organic chicken, and the pork. It's antibiotic and hormone-free, which is awesome stuff. I'm a big meat eater. I know you're doing the keto diet right now, right? Are you still doing keto?
No, I'm just
You're
low
off.
carb.
Okay, but you're a big meat eater.
I eat
So
low carb. I've been
yeah,
doing low carb for a year and a half.
so I'm back to low carb. I'm actually right back into my old diet where I did a lot of. Listen, I'm not. By the way, this isn't a doctor's advice, right? I'm not a trainer, but this worked for me. I did a lot of meat and I did very little carbs, and it was the best thing I did. I felt unbelievable. Just the carbs kill me. I'm so sluggish on this stuff. So the way that it works, you order your meat, delivered to your door, and it's actually amazing. The fact that it saves a hassle from actually going and shopping, and you know that the quality of stuff that you're getting is actually really good. And here's a great offer for you guys. So go to butcherbox.com slash, I'm trying to see, butcherbox.com, I'm sorry. And you could use the promo code Andrew when checking out. Have you gotten one yet, Paul?
No.
A ButcherBox?
Mm-mm.
I gotta find out why you didn't get yours. Because
The
I know,
people who live in my old house in Dedham are probably enjoying it right now.
you know what? It's quite possible that they got it and they had a great time.
Hmm.
They really, really loved it. So you go to butcherbox.com. You can receive $10 off plus free bacon for life of your subscription to the service. That's $10 off and free bacon for life for your subscription by butcherbox.com. And you use the code Andrew10 when you check out. That's Andrew10 when you check out. This is a limited time offer, obviously, but that's $10 off plus free bacon for life by going to butcherbox.com and clicking on the big banner on the homepage and entering the promo code Andrew10, which is awesome. I absolutely love these guys, and I love the quality of their product, and I'm going to eat, I'm going to cook some steak right after this, so that'll be perfect. And that beep is going to drive me nuts. I'm just going to tell you, I apologize that that thing is getting ripped out this week now that I'm around more. So let's talk about this Apple event. It was last Tuesday.
The sanity of a week.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy that it was a week ago. But, there's a lot to talk about this. And I do want to concentrate on the iPad to begin with, because I found it interesting that this thing is now being elevated to their PC level, right? To their laptops, where at the price, the pricing is crazy high for that MacBook, for that iPad Pro, compared to the regular iPad. If you get the cover and you get this and you get the pencil, I mean, that thing is starting to be in the $1,000 range. I think we spec'd out the most expensive one. The most expensive one was like $1,700 last week when we did it. Why the aggressiveness towards the iPad?
Actually, I'm a little surprised by it because a year ago, when they released iOS 11, that version of the operating system had a bunch of new multitasking changes that were specific to iPad Pro, and they varied between the models. But when you have a device with a really big screen like the 12.9 inch version, you can have two full-sized iPad apps side by side on that device. They kind of embrace this. Here's what you can do with it. Like, here's where we're going. And then this year, iOS 12 came out, and there was nothing. It was like literally
Yeah.
nothing that was specific to iPad Pro, not like that. And I thought they had kind of scaled back because one of the things we've learned in the past year is that the iPad Pro through the first two generations had done nothing to fix the problem with iPad sales. When they finally released a lower cost 9.7-inch non-Pro iPad, all of a sudden they had a quarter or maybe 2 quarters where sales actually went up again. Right now, it's actually since contracted, but I thought the lesson there was really obvious: lower prices, and let the iPad be what the iPad is. It's just it's a consumption tablet. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the only good one. And here they are again. So I'm a little confused by it. And this is going to sound like a goofy thing to say, but they waited so long to upgrade the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini, and then they finally did it. And it's like they couldn't let it stand on its own, right?
Yeah.
They had to like outdo the MacBook Air somehow. It's like literally in two breaths. It's like, here's the thing everyone's been clamoring for. Oh, and by the way, here's what a modern computer really looks like. This other thing, the iPad Pro. It's kind of a weird thing to do these back to back like they did.
So
I don't know. There's nothing inherent to these devices that advances the state of the platform. It has smaller bezels. It has a pencil that doesn't roll anymore and that attaches with a magnet. That's great. And there's a segment of the population that can get by with these things for work. There's no doubt about it. It's not a real laptop replacement for most people. It may evolve in that direction. We'll see. But I just it just doesn't make sense to me. The timing of it just seems kind of weird.
So I was having this conversation the other day with someone that's really smart about these things, and he brought up the fact that it was not you, it was not Paul, it was not Paul, and it was an interesting outlook at this, and they said, well, why wouldn't they make this the forefront of their laptop? They're treating this as a laptop because if you look at the Mac OS, the obvious evolution for Mac OS will be iOS. It will be the integration of iOS apps on the Mac platform. You already know those applications. You use it on your cheaper iPad, or you use it on your iPad 2, which everybody had. You use it on your phone. So when you incorporate this in Mac OS, where these iOS applications are now universal across 3 platforms, why wouldn't you push the iPad? The MacBook is something that will be phased out in the long run of Apple's, outlook.
Okay. I
That
might have an
that's
answer.
okay.
And you have to kind of think of the way Apple does things, but I think most people would look at this situation and say, look, you've got this thing that's a pure tablet, you've got this thing that's a phone, and they have touch interfaces, and people love them. But you also have these laptops, which people love and are very productive with. And the obvious thing to do is to add touch to those devices, the laptops, make them into two-in-ones in some cases, detachable tablets if you want. It's still a Mac, but because it can run iPad apps or iOS apps, um, we could do to this platform what Google did to Chrome OS. There's some sense to it. But why aren't they doing it, right? So you have to think. You have to think like Apple, which is really difficult because it's a very contrarian view in some ways. And I think a lot of times the decisions they make, like the new iPad Pro doesn't have a headphone jack. You're like, what is the thinking here? It's
Yeah.
crazy. But here's the thing. Here's the one thing I really think this is um, just from the perspective of like a platform maker or which Apple is. I think the reason is with the iPad Pro, they control the whole widget. The
Yeah.
processor in the iPad Pro is theirs, right? Um, I know that people believe, and there's some reason to think this, that maybe Apple will bring the Mac to the ARM, the A series chipset. But the thing is, I feel like the Mac, there are always going to be Macs that can't. The Mac Pro class devices can never use that chip. It's not, I shouldn't say never, but it's a much further off time when that kind of thing is possible. The Intel thing will always for the foreseeable future, have a huge performance advantage. I think those things become like workstations, far lower volume, and that what they see is the possibility for I don't want to call it mainstream because they're so expensive, but let's call it a mainstream computing platform that's easy to use, that people love, that is an Apple product, and it's Apple through and through, from the chip all the way up to the OS.
Well, I mean, I agree. First of all, I agree with you 180% that is the future of this. But the MacBook Pro, right? And I have this argument a lot, and I get called out on this where people ask me, "Well, where are your numbers coming from?" First of all, there are no set numbers for Apple MacBook Pro sales, right? And my
Oh,
and
yeah.
and this is what my response is all the time. How many
Mm.
15-inch Touch Bar MacBook Pros do you see in the real world, right? I live in New York City. New York City is not the real world. It's a
Uh,
microcosm of MacBooks everywhere, but you don't see any of these 15-inch MacBook Pros in the wild. It's not a
yeah, I was going to
reality
say,
for the PC
right.
market.
You Yeah, I'm a little nervous about any use of anecdotal information, but I think it is fair to, because what I was thinking as you were saying that was you could be in a place where you might see a lot of MacBook Airs or 13-inch MacBook
Sure,
Pros.
absolutely, agree with you 100%. Yeah,
Could be an airport, an airplane, a train. It could be in a big city like where you are. Um, and you're right. What you don't see are 15-inch MacBook Pros. Now, that might be because they're used in different situations,
it's
but there's
possible.
no way that's not the volume
Listen,
product,
that's
right? I mean,
possible. I also really
it's
don't see
possible, but
13-inch Touch Bar MacBook Pros. I very
yeah.
rarely.
Yep.
Majority of the MacBooks that I see are MacBook Airs. That's what I see every time I'm sitting at a bar or I'm at Starbucks. I see if it's a Mac. I'm just throwing a number out there. Probably five
Yeah.
out of the 10 times I'm seeing a MacBook Pro, and then I'm seeing a MacBook Air, and
You
then
know,
the other times it's just a bunch of old MacBooks.
it's silly of Apple not to have updated the MacBook Air over such a long period of time. I think anyone would agree with that. Anyway, I'm glad they did. I think they had to. I think there is an audience of people who were using some previous generation of the device, wanted something just like it but modern. Um, Looked at the MacBook, it was too small. Looked at the MacBook Pro, it was too expensive, and they kind of waited. And this is going to satisfy a need. I think this is going to sell well. I know there are complaints about the price and whatever, but when you kind of sandwich it between the other products, it's like okay, it's satisfying a need. If both for Apple and for its customers. But I think the selling point on the iPad Pro is the same as the say the MacBook Air would have been a few years ago, maybe back when it was first released. It's the same as it is for Chromebook, including high-end Chromebooks, by the way, like the Pixel Book or the Acer Chromebook Spin, which is I think costs $900 to $1,000 itself, and it's a 360 transforming Chromebook, high quality design, blah blah blah, whatever. This is a computer for people who are don't want the complexity of a real computer. You know,
Yeah.
it's something they're familiar with. They have an iPhone, so they know how the apps work and how all that touchy stuff works. And you can attach a keyboard and you can type stuff on it.
Okay,
It solves that problem.
so here's a question, right? Let's present this, right? We know that the next version of Mac OS is going to incorporate iOS apps. We've already seen it happen with the News app on Mac OS,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
that if you have a Mac, and if you don't, you could look it up. This is the epitome of what these applications are going to be like. It's very similar
Mhm.
to what Microsoft has done with their universal apps, where it's it's its own thing. And
Yeah,
I think for the Mac, I think this is very beneficial. They have a gigantic ecosystem of applications that people use daily. I
yeah,
actually used a News app, and I never thought I would.
yeah,
I actually
yeah.
use it. So
I do too.
we know what's happening on the Mac side. What is there a possibility that Apple says, you know what, let's incorporate some sort of desktop on the Mac.
On iOS.
Doesn't in iOS, on the Pro line. That it would make sense on the Pro line. That's where you
Um,
separate it. The regular iPad is the iOS that you know, and then if you have an iPad Pro, it enables. It doesn't have to listen. By the way, I'm not saying that you're going to incorporate Mac OS right into that, but it does some sort of
sure.
multi-function
Hybrid.
use. It does some sort of
Yeah.
hybrid where you could have applications on the screen where you could kind of see what's happening
I
everywhere.
I would be careful of saying no to that. Like, in other words, there are a lot of things that Apple has actually done in recent years, which a few years earlier people would say they would never have done. There's a Files app in iOS now where you can actually look at the file system. This is one of those things I really wanted to hide from people because of the complexity. So when I think about the iPad Pro, honestly, a desktop is not the issue to me. It's an accurate pointer. It's a trackpad. And it's possible. I don't want to say never to this because one of the things that Apple has to kind of figure out as it brings iOS apps to the Mac is how some of the navigation stuff works because it's different between the two platforms and how you interact accurately with the typical interfaces you have on a Mac, which include the touchpad or trackpad. Like the News app you were talking about doesn't support any sense of keyboard navigation, right? You can't tab between the different topic areas or whatever it might be. Um, these kind of apps need to be updated to support this hybrid use. And once there are a ton of them, and this is that virtuous cycle thing Steve Jobs used to talk about, you could kind of see it coming back in the other direction. Steve, or in this case, Tim Cook will stand up on stage 2 years from now and say, hey, when we did this work, one of the things that all these app makers had to do was make sure that their apps worked with a trackpad. Well, guess what? Now there are thousands of them. Well, guess what? Now we can add a trackpad to the iPad, and it's a gimme. It just happens.
Yeah.
You just if you have the trackpad, it will just work. And frankly, that is not preposterous.
And by the way,
So
so you add that trackpad functionality. Now you have a $799 iPad Pro. You know what? It's now justifiable for many people that would say that's obscene. I'm not going to pay $799 for a tablet with a crappy keyboard.
yeah, I mean, the problem, of course, the iPad Pro has the problem that Windows 10s had, which is it's an excellent idea. It's a nice destination. It's not ready today.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you buy that thing today, you're wasting that money. I mean, I many people are. I mean, some
It
people
has to
obviously
be
can get away with it.
interesting on the Microsoft side to see this type of announcement and see the initiative that Apple has taken with the iPad,
Yeah,
kind of competing it with the Surface, which listen, people watching the show, me, you, our listeners, it when you on paper, it is not competition, but for the general consumer that's
But
just
it
doing
is.
this,
But it is.
this, and a couple emails and a couple IMs,
By the way, that's
it
most
is
people, though.
competition. That's most
It
people.
is competition. So the problem that Microsoft faced was that, and faces today, is that the PC, that Windows has not evolved into a credible alternative to the iPad from kind of a consumption app game perspective. It's as a tablet, right? It's just, and of course, when they announced Surface originally, I think it was, I don't know if it was Tim Cook or Steve Jobs anymore, but somebody talked about, you can converge a refrigerator and a microwave oven, but nobody wants that, that kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, but you, I mean, you could converge a, a microwave and an oven, and like actually someone would want that. I mean, there are some convergences that do make sense. And I have to kind of fall back on this thing I've been thinking about for a long time, which is just that in this new world of computing where most of it's occurring on mobile devices, the mass amount of the usage is occurring through these touch interfaces, email, web browsing, reading, watching movies,
Yeah.
playing games. And then every once in a while, you need a keyboard and maybe a bigger screen, and a mouse if you're using a PC or a Mac. And you have to write a paper or you do some heavy duty spreadsheet for some reason. You need to do a lot of typing. If you could make that simpler thing work well in that latter thing, there's some success to be had. I think that's the point behind Chrome OS and the point behind the iPad Pro in some ways. Surface showed them the way, but Microsoft came at it from the other direction because, of course, Microsoft had the PC. And unfortunately, as good as the Surface Pro is, and it is an excellent computer, it's still a computer.
Yeah.
And as a tablet, something someone might interact with touch or using like a pen, it may work well. I'm sure it does. And if you're a cartoonist or a graphic artist or whatever, I'm sure you'll get some use out of that. But that's a tiny percentage of the population.
Yeah. I want to touch on this. Paul, we are having some audio issues on your end with me.
Oh,
Do you want to reconnect?
No, I don't, Andrew.
Okay. All right. While you reconnect, we're going to take a moment.
Of course I will.
Yeah.
All right, so I should just call you back.
Yeah. While we reconnect, we're going to take a moment to talk about our great sponsor, and that's Slack. You've heard me talk about how I use this at my former job on a regular basis just to keep everybody in the loop. So what Slack does, it's a collaboration hub that lets you organize your team's work so you could easily search through different channels. So whether it's a project or interests for your team or by office, all the right people are always in the loop relative to the information in one place, and new team members can easily get caught up to speed by just going backwards. This is great. Slack is where work happens. To learn more, go to slack.com. What I would do, actually, I would have different departments in Slack, and I would have everybody communicating through one super channel, and then I would have individual channels where if I needed to message, marketing, or I needed to message operations, they would just get that information. So the things that everybody needs to know, everybody knows. The things that you don't need to know, you don't need to know. It's absolutely awesome. And the fact that you could have this on iOS, Android, and it syncs seamlessly amongst your devices is great. You could also incorporate it with over 1,000 applications like Zendesk, Salesforce, and Google Drive. You could take a look at all the other, there's over 1,000 apps you could do. Slack, where work happens. To learn more, go to slack.com. That's slack.com. Paul, you're back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you were like robot-y.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I loved it.
I don't know.
Paul in the future. No, listen, it's a very interesting time because we are now evolving, right? Technology, a couple of years ago, we always go back to like 2011 where a lot of things change and it was so aggressive and boom, 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 innovation. And then now we've hit the point where, it's slowed down, obviously, for majority of people. We're just fixing things that generally don't work, or we're learning how people use these devices. It's a mature device compared to a couple of years ago. But a lot of things that are overlooked is what Intel's been doing. For years we were talking about the fact that as soon as Intel starts having a cooler chip and a faster chip in these 13-inch, 11-inch form factors, 12-inch form factors, a lot is going to change. And they added it, right? The new MacBook Pros and all the 13-inch devices all across the PC market now have quad-core processors. I think that is that was a leap in my
Yeah.
opinion, that a lot of people aren't talking about. A lot, and I
Well,
don't think a
the
lot of
other
people
thing
are
is,
aware.
as our Qualcomm tries to get ARM into the PC space, and there are rumors that Apple wants to do this as well with their own chips. The big benefits you see there are that you can't get on a traditional Intel platform is pretty much battery life, right? There's connectivity stuff, but you can get that on the Intel side. Um, I see a lot of Windows or Intel based laptops that get tremendous battery life, and I think this is kind of erasing some of it. Now, granted, these things will have fans and exhaust, and it has to do all that kind of stuff. It's not a fanless system typically, but the new Spectre X360 gets 15 hours is your battery life. The Surface Laptop 2 get 12 to 13 hours of battery life. When you talk about things like 20 hours of battery life is awesome, obviously, but if it's not compatible with all your apps, if the performance is terrible, it kind of just drags you down. But if you could get 2/3 of the battery life, or 3/4 of the battery life, but 100% compatibility, the performance is awesome. That's where this stuff kind of changes the script a little bit. And so everyone's kind of dumping on Intel because they can't get down to 10 nanometers or whatever. But the truth is, like you said, if you look at the stuff that they are doing on the PC with quad core processors, no hidden battery life at all, and then wonderful designs from computer makers with computers that have awesome battery life and performance, and obviously compatibility, something we don't think about in the Intel world. I mean, I think they have a pretty effective answer, and God help us when they do hit 10 enemies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you saw I can't, maybe I can, I've been, oh, it's attached. I can't bring it over here, but I've been working with the new Intel NUC, and it's a U series processor, 8th generation, so it's quad core, but it runs at 28 watts. A typical U series processor in a normal laptop today runs at 15 watts. So it's almost double the heat generated that you can generate in this chip without it imploding on itself, which means you can run the thing harder and faster. Now it requires a little bit more cooling, but it is a desktop computer. And I think it's really interesting because it's not some giant hunking tower, and it's not running an HQ or a K series or whatever the other processor names are. It doesn't have discrete graphics, although you could add it over Thunderbolt 3, which it also supports. Um, yeah, the sheer it's not just laptops, I guess is my point. I mean, when you look at it from a kind of across the ecosystem, you're right. I don't think Intel. It's easy to criticize like the market leader. I mean, I think we all fall into that a little bit, but and of course, in Intel's case, they've publicly stated this goal of 10 nanometers and have been unable to hit it in volume so far.
Have they
Um,
explained why they're having such difficulty with the 10 nanometer?
I think it just comes down to quality of the yield. They can do it, they just can't do it at volume.
Yeah,
You
but
know.
was it a premature, I guess, assumption that they'd be able to do it? But I mean, for years we've been talking, for I think like 2 years we've been talking about the 10 nanometer. Uh,
Yeah, but AMD's not on 10 nanometer, is it? I mean, I don't think it's just Intel. I think it might have to do with the architecture.
no,
It can't.
AMD's running generators. Still
Okay,
those
but I
things
mean,
are
I don't
heating
actually know. I
units.
don't mean to be facetious. Like maybe they are. I don't believe they're on 10 nanometers. There might be something about the x86 architecture that is to hardware what Windows is to software. It's like the big, heavy legacy thing. It's been around for a long time. So, Qualcomm. Not that ARM chips don't have a decades long, um, you know, uh, history or whatever, but as chips that were designed specifically for tiny mobile devices where connectivity and battery life matter a lot more, and they have a different architecture with performance and efficiency cores and so forth. There may be something inherent to that type of architecture. We're getting to these smaller sizes. I think Apple just announced like 7 nanometers, didn't they? Is just easier. But the thing is, for like a phone, 7-10 nanometers is humongous.
Yeah,
For a laptop,
it's
yes,
tiny.
there are absolutely
Yeah.
benefits. It could be thinner. There could be no fans. Like we get that. There's no doubt about it. But like I said, when you look at what's actually happening in that space today, with quad core, right, 8th generation parts, tremendous battery life. Not always, but usually, um, it's certainly possible. So, what are we complaining about?
I have to tell you, so Bob Swan, the CEO of Intel last week, I
Yeah.
think it was last week when he said this. He said that they had made tremendous progress and tremendous
Hmm.
strides, and they were kind of looking at the holiday 2019 timeframe for these 10 nanometer chipsets. I have to tell you, I listen. First of all, I hope they get to this, because obviously innovation is great. I don't care who gets to it, but if it's AMD or
Yeah.
Intel, but I would not want that first gen chipset for that 10 nanometer. With
Yeah, for
all the
sure.
difficulty that they have faced, and all the, I know that there's an emphasis
Yep.
emphasis within the company to kind of get this going, because that's their goal over the last couple of years. I
Well,
definitely don't want to be the first person to have that chip.
yeah, I'm curious to see. I mean, obviously, 10 nanometers is something that's going to occur across the processor families, right? But Intel also has I would call it a mostly negative history of their thin, light designs. class, Pentium M's back in the day, Core M's more recently, Y series processors today, where Atom processors, uh, not a lot of good vibes around any of the product names I just mentioned, and it would be crippling to Intel to have those kinds of problems in their mainstream processor families, especially the U series. So yeah, I this is one of those things you want, that they want to, and we as customers would want to have them get right. And I think what history has shown us is that them being delayed on this by a couple years, I
Yeah.
don't know that it's materially impacted anything. I mean, are there um, you know, half pencil thick PCs sitting in the waiting in the wings to come out just when we can get down to 10 nanometers? I mean,
I mean, here's
maybe.
the interesting thing. Okay, so if you look at Intel's trajectory, right? In
Yeah,
2008, it was a 45 nanometer chipset.
sure.
10 years ago, we're
Yeah.
now at, what are we at now right now? I mean, their
48.
goal is 10 nanometer by 2018. It's not happening. We're at 14 nanometer, but that's fine.
Yeah.
AMD is looking to push 7 nanometer chipsets this year.
Are they? AMD is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the progression has been tremendous from 45 nanometer into
Yeah.
14 nanometer. We're talking significant
I
improvements.
just think, like you got to be careful with a company like Intel because they're so powerful and have such resources that they can flip switches that other companies can't. The quad core thing, I think, kind of came out of the blue a year or so ago. And it's the type of thing they can just do. Like, we're just going to double, we don't really double. It's probably like a 40% across the board, or maybe 60% performance improvement or whatever, with no loss of battery life, right? We're just going to put it out. And I think that silences a lot of the critics who are worried about some theoretical thing, which is whatever the benefit might be of just going to 10 nanometer. Um,
Yeah.
so like I said, look, I'll mock them as much as anyone. Being a cruel human being, I enjoy watching gigantic colossus companies fail. So I'll enjoy that on that level. But the truth is, they can turn on a spigot at any point, and
Yeah.
they've proven in the past that they can turn. They adopted the core chipset that came out of Israel. They adopted x64 that came out of AMD. You know,
Yeah. I mean,
this is now the mainstream processor. This is the computer today. This was not something Intel had to do. Well, maybe they did, arguably, but it was something a lesser company wouldn't have done in both cases, and they did it. So we'll see.
I listen. I'm really happy about the progression. Right, it's
Mhm.
great, and we all benefit from it. The fact that we're talking about, those. I'm very much interested in that 13-inch Spectre from HP, because it has that new quad core. Right, that they
Yeah,
incorporated. I think it was last November. Right, was it last November that they started putting them in? That they
yeah.
unveiled those. So I mean, we're a
Uh,
year in. Um, and I think that's beneficial to everybody. You may not realize it as a consumer, but it just extended the lifespan of your product significantly. Those
yeah.
those dual core i7s serve no good to anybody. I was
Yeah.
having this argument with somebody. They had a
Mm,
13-inch MacBook, the previous one before the Touch Bar. When he goes, no, but it's an
yeah.
i7. I go, yeah, but it's a dual core i7. He goes, no, it's a quad core. I said, no, it's a dual core,
Right.
quad threaded, dual. It's a dual core.
Yeah.
And he looked at it. He goes, holy crap! I had no idea i7s were dual core. I'm like, yeah, but it's not just Apple. It's the entire PC market prior to this new chipset.
Yeah.
That's how it was. Very,
Well, I
and
mean,
I, I would have put my money on. I really would have put my money on how important this was, and it would be this renaissance of this
mhm.
PC market. And you know what? I fell flat on my face with this because I thought it was a major, uh, significant improvement to the PC market with these quad cores.
Well, I think it is actually. I mean, but the PC market is in such a weird place, right? It's obviously sales have fallen, and one of the less well understood reasons for that is that PCs are actually pretty high quality and they last a long time now.
Yeah,
What Intel did by moving from dual core to quad core just future proofs these devices even more. You know, like these things are going to last forever now. It's a very interesting twist because a lot of the other things we buy, especially tech products, whether they're things like phones or TVs, the understanding is we're going to have these things for a couple of years and then we're
yeah.
getting rid of them. You know,
Well, yeah.
it's really interesting that PCs are something that can last. And it's not just because people use them less, although, yes, I mean, that's part of it for sure. I don't think
Well,
this other
also,
aspect of it gets a lot of press.
listen, the hardware, obviously, the hardware is getting better, right? But the software also is a lot more efficient that we're using.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of reliance on GPUs rather than CPUs, and that really helps a lot when you're doing any kind of heavy video editing.
Hmm.
I'm running a. We're about to go to 1080p here with what we're doing, but our limitation is the cameras at this point, not the hardware that we're using. And this computer is maybe 3-4 years old. Where
This
three
has
four
been
years ago, if I had a 3-4 year old computer, guess what? I was not able to do the production I was able to do today. And we're doing a
this has
full
been
fledged. I don't know if you guys could see. I'll show you right now. This is what I look at. People love it when I do this, Paul. People love me. Let me see if I could do this. This is what I look at. This is my production setup.
mhm.
I mean, we have different elements, different angles, different shots. Let me see if I can pull this up. I mean, this is not a simple setup that we have. We're doing stuff, We have different camera angles. You're coming in via
Mhm.
a web connection directly in here. This is not the years ago where you needed to just use Skype. And by the way, this is a lot of video, heavy duty video that's needed to do 1080.
Yeah.
Even to this day, I know we're in the 4K
Yes.
era, but 1080 still requires a lot of power. We're able to do this not only because of good hardware, but efficient software. So your laptop that you buy now, if you buy an HP or you buy a MacBook Pro 13-inch with a quad core, that thing can last you about 7 years. No questions asked.
Right.
It's a
Right.
possibility, depending on what you use and what your requirements
Yep.
are.
Yep.
I think it's a. I thought it would have been a um more public thing. People would have known about this a little bit more than they
Um,
did.
well, but you have to understand this is something I think even people in the industry kind of forget this or don't understand it. This has actually been building for a long time, and it has its roots back to the megahertz wars back in the
Yeah.
90s or whatever. Um, we get it like in just because I'm more into the Windows thing. I know that when they went to Windows Vista, one of the things they learned was we can have this really kind of graphically rich operating system that has like translucencies and transparencies, and it looks like glass. And if we can offload it, that display to a graphics, take it off the CPU, something wonderful happens, right? We're not taxing the CPU. The battery life actually improves. This thing is more efficient, even though it
Yeah.
looks way better because it's not rendering all of it in software through the CPU. You see this in the mobile space. Remember back in, I don't know, when it was probably with the iPhone 5 or 5S, Apple introduced the first version of their M series chips, which is like the motion chip. The same idea. We've got this thing we want to track your movement for health reasons. And if we take that tracking off of the CPU and put it in this other thing, there are all these efficiencies, and now the battery life gets better, and it's all. And you see it everywhere. It's like everywhere is like this. Everyone has custom chips to do custom things, and it's not always about battery life, but a lot of times it's about performance or whatever. There's a Pixel Sense chip and uh, Surface computers that makes the pen better and more performant and more natural. And Every device now, it seems, has something like that, or some things like that. And so, yeah, you find these things over time. I mean, we've discovered that GPUs, instead of traditional CPUs, are actually better for certain forms of highly scalable computing tasks like AI and machine learning. And suddenly, companies that make those things like NVIDIA see their stock explode through the roof, because now it's not just for goofy guys to play video games with. It's like this is like some dramatic need for computing horsepower that's better served by this kind of architecture.
Yeah.
So yeah, it didn't happen. 'Cause I think the reason it doesn't get press is it didn't happen Sunday night. It happened a little bit here, a little bit here.
Yeah.
That thing I described, Windows Vista, came out in 2005.
Well, also,
So they
you
were
brought up
working
something
on this
interesting,
in
right? You brought up the
yeah.
megahertz wars.
hmm
So I was talking to my wife about this last week about a friend of hers
You were
bought a
talking to
laptop.
your wife about the megahertz wars.
It
You have
kind
the
of
saddest relationship.
kind of right, because she's not she's not a techie at all, right? And I said to her, I'm like, let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
Her friend bought a laptop I told her not to get, right? And she regretted it from day
Okay.
one.
And what
She
are you going to tell us what the laptop was?
I told her to get a MacBook Pro, a 13-inch
Mhm.
MacBook Pro, and she ended up buying a MacBook.
Okay.
Right,
Slightly
because it
different
was
taste.
pretty, because it was a pretty. And by the way, I'm not knocking her. It is a beautiful laptop, but I said, I explained to her how much faster this is,
Right.
and I turned to Jess, and she goes, "Oh, but she doesn't care about that." I said, "Let me ask you something. When you were a kid, right? Because
Right.
I'm like, we had one day we were talking. She bought this compact Passaria.
Oh boy.
She had a compact Passaria when she was I'm talking in the 90s. And I said,
Yeah.
how many megahertz was that compact Passaria? Without even thinking, she goes, 750 megahertz.
Like she knew this.
She knew this. And she's not a technical person. I go, what was the one before that? She goes, 266 megahertz. I go, the fact that you know this and you remember it and you have
Yeah.
no idea what you have. I said, what's your MacBook now? She goes, I don't know. I think that is the answer for a lot of people. It's not, and this goes
By
down
the
to
way,
marketing.
if it's fast enough, you shouldn't have to think about this. I was thinking when we were having that conversation about iPad Pro versus, whatever, MacBook Air or whatever other computer, it sort of reminded me of that switch over to, from horse and buggy to the car, Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the wrong. Early days of the car, when cars were first a thing, one of the requirements for ownership was you had to know how it worked, because you had to take it apart and fix it and get it back on the road. And they were always breaking down. They were really unreliable. And then, today cars aren't even mechanical anymore. They're computerized. You could bring it to a professional mechanic at a gas station. He's like, I can't touch this thing. It's got
Yeah.
whatever computer circuitry going on. I can't, we don't have the machines for that anymore. No one cares anymore.
I don't know,
Your
but
car could
I
have
think
like
people know.
a
I think
weird
people know how
transmission
many.
no one's ever heard of or whatever. Like I think computers are heading in this direction too.
No, they absolutely are. But I still think to an extent you kind of know. Like my wife knows how many horsepower her Volvo has.
Oh, my wife would never know this.
She knows it. I guess maybe a little bit because of me, right? Because I'm like, I kind of.
Even I don't know
I'm
it.
the
I don't, and I'm into cars. Um, I don't know that any. I just don't.
Maybe it
I
doesn't
mean,
matter
look,
anymore. Yeah,
when
our
you're
priorities have
sitting in a
changed.
car and you're, all cars have different characteristics, right? So I had a used BMW before that was around town, drove like a car. It was just there was nothing special. It wasn't particularly fast off the line. It was a 3 Series sedan. You got that thing on the highway and you were driving 55, 60 miles an hour. To go from that speed to 80 took about 1 second. That was its sweet spot. And that car wanted to drive 80 miles an hour all the time. I had to get rid of it. Well, eventually I did get rid of it. But around town, I was never going to get a speeding ticket. The problem was always going to be on the highway,
Yeah.
because you look down and be like, oh, geez, I'm going like 90 miles an hour. Now, how many horsepower did that thing have? I have no idea. How does that relate to what I just described? I'm actually not sure. My wife has a smaller and newer and also used BMW. It's not as punchy as the car I had, but it has different characteristics. Her car is really fast off the line. You could actually leave rubber with it very easily. It's got a much smaller engine than my car did, and it's not as awesome on the highway. It just isn't. It's a different kind of vehicle, and
So
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know what
no,
any
but
of the
you
measurements
brought
are.
up
This engine
you brought up something
size.
interesting though. You
Yeah.
said I don't even know if it matters when you're talking about the speed of the CPU on these devices. I think we've kind of conditioned ourselves over the last couple of years because we know that I my theory to this is that
Mhm.
we were trained over years of marketing that it doesn't really matter as much because they hit the cap when it came to speed, when it came to megahertz, right?
Well,
We're not going over that 3.8 to 4.2 megahertz chipset when in the 90s, 400, 450, 500, 700, who's going to be the
yeah, but
first to get the
that
gigahertz?
was speed. In other
That was
words,
speed.
if you go back to the 1960s, if you bought a four-cylinder Camaro, if you could, or a six-cylinder Camaro, if you could, or an eight-cylinder, you would have seen a difference between those vehicles. Back then, raw power really mattered. This stuff only matters when it's not there for you.
Yeah,
If you go to switch between apps on a Mac or a phone or an iPad or whatever it is, and it doesn't happen quickly, and there's some kind of weird screen effect, that matters. Like
of
that you'll
course.
notice that. When
But,
I
but
bring up the camera app on my phone and it doesn't come up right away, and I hit the wrong thing on screen because it's moving so slow, I don't know if it's the processor, the RAM, the memory management, the operating system. I have no idea what the problem is. What I do know is there's a problem and it makes me crazy. But if this
yeah.
thing just worked every day, I wouldn't. Who cares what the speed is?
Listen, but
What the
when
numbers
you
are.
do, when you go and you buy a MacBook, when you really needed a MacBook Pro, and you
Yeah.
spend all that money and you've
Well,
had it for a couple of weeks, and now you don't really want to return it because that's a hassle, and
yep.
because you have no concept of what the speed is and what your necessity
Well,
is,
but
all you're buying is
these are two
aesthetics.
extremes, though. Like
Very, very,
the
very much so. Yeah.
the MacBook is well understood to be underpowered, right?
I
I
don't
mean,
know. I don't to us, to me and
I
you.
no, okay,
Do you think okay? Well, here's a good example. If your wife or my wife went into the went to the Apple store and
yep.
they had to pick a computer and they saw it and they thought this is a really good computer, would they know that this smaller computer here doesn't have the power that maybe a 13-inch rival of it does? I don't think so because Apple doesn't tell you. And
Yeah,
and by the
and
way, the
right.
PC market doesn't tell you. They no longer push that this is performance. It's a
So
little blip for an enthusiast.
I don't have a problem with it when it's fine. The problem occurs when a PC maker uses a Y series part, or back in the day, a Core M part, because what they wanted to do was get to a fanless design, which by the way is now possible with i5s, full i5s. They wanted to get to a really thin and light form factor, and for some reason they felt that this was more beneficial than performance. Remember, like the Core M chips, the way this thing's work, like the first time you did anything, it was horrible. It was like horribly slow. But once you started running Word or whatever, like Word
Yeah.
would actually run fine after a while. Like I don't want to prime the pump. I just want it to work. Like to me that was the wrong compromise. We don't know. Like the new MacBook Air has a Y series chip, but it's running at a higher wattage. I forget the number now. What is it? 7 watts versus 5. It does have cooling, like there's a fan, so they can kind of sustain performance longer than would be the case on a normal MacBook. Maybe it will be okay. If that thing is okay for what I would call like everyday tasks, not running Photoshop necessarily, not running AutoCAD programs, not playing, full screen, beautiful games, 3D with all the textures turned up. That's probably fine, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But um, the MacBook was the one time I think where Apple kind of like, it was like, this is in recent years, like this is not good enough. Like this is a curious choice.
Yeah.
And don't you kind of wonder, like the MacBook Air, do you think they held off on this? Do you think they actually had a plan to go 10 nanometer? And because Intel kept pushing it back, they were like, shit, we got to do something else.
I
Like, what can we do? We can't put
I
a
think
15-watt part in this thing.
if I were to guess, I would say that that was the assumption with the MacBook to put the
Yeah.
10 nanometer in a MacBook and let that be,
Yeah.
a great example of what the PC market should be. Because Apple did that with the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air was the blueprint to what the Ultrabooks became in the
Yeah.
2010, 2011, 2012.
The problem is, in the 8 years that have gone by since that second generation MacBook Air, the market has really matured, and the MacBook Air was really trend setting when it not when it first came out, but when the second one came out. The machine everyone calls a MacBook Air is the second version, right?
The
I mean,
second gen, yeah.
the first one was a dog. Like it sold terribly. it was on some kind of a ultra mobile chipset and whatever. It was terrible.
But you could put it in
Um,
an envelope.
you could put it in an envelope. I don't know why you would do that, but yes. And the problem is now what they've released is something that is looks like a new version of that laptop, which is great, but it doesn't really have a lot of the stuff that you see in more modern ultrabooks. There have been advances, you know.
Yeah.
There are some advances. I think the Touch ID thing is cool. Although we've had fingerprint readers for a long time on Windows, I think the Retina screen is important. You know, um, I don't know. It doesn't have that same innovative newness to it. You know,
Yeah. The
that's something
beep
to say.
controls my life, by the way. That's how I know to move on into other
Yeah.
subjects. And the
Okay.
beep is now, that one little beep has communicated to me that I need to let you guys know that we also have a Patreon page. If you go to patreon.com/whatthetech, you could fund us there. And by the way, I could use all the funds right now because I quit my job. I'm back to just podcasting full time and racing 2 kids. So I'm going to guilt you guys into funding me this week. By the way, last week there were so many people that subscribed and resubscribed to our Patreon. It was amazing. I got so many messages from people. If you didn't hear the bonus show that we did, I explained to everybody how I left my job. I was there for about 20 months. I got up. I couldn't do it anymore. So I just said, I'm done with this. I need to get back to my real life, and I feel so much better. I mean, even doing the show with you, Paul. Have you noticed that I'm a lot more happier, and I'm like, let's do this. I'm back.
Sure.
And Paul,
Yeah,
by the way, saw me the week before. Right? It was probably the week before I left. You saw me because you were in the city, and I was just so destroyed. I was defeated.
Yes.
Life had defeated me. So if you guys want to help us out, we're going to record a bonus show right after this. Go to patreon.com/whatthetech. I need to redo that whole structure there. But $1 a month, if you guys fund that or whatever you guys want to fund, it goes a long way. And it continues us to create great content and continue growing because I have all these ideas now that I could actually go ahead and do. That's patreon.com/
You have free time.
Oh, God help you. God help all of us now that I have all this time. Patreon.com/whatthetech. Paul, I do want to talk to you about your experience with the OnePlus 6T.
Yep.
But let's save that for the bonus show. So if you're watching this live, stay tuned. You can continue watching on twitch.tv/guysfromqueens. We are also streaming on, I don't know what else we're streaming on right now, but we will be streaming on YouTube Live and all these other platforms starting in a week or so. We just have to build that computer because actually talking about performance, Paul, that computer can't handle doing all the feeds. So we have to come up with a better method. So if you're watching this live, stay tuned. We're going to do our bonus show where Paul and I talk about whatever. And this week we'll talk about the OnePlus 6T. And I saw something on your site about the Surface. What is that? What is that? What is that? A patent image?
Oh, yeah.
What am I?
It's for a lot of like really stupid dual screen Microsoft hardware patent images in the world. This one is, if you can imagine, it's like a Surface Pro and it's got the kickstand out, so it's sitting on a desk. There's like a writable screen type area on the back for some reason.
Oh,
like on the top,
because that's
like,
that's
guys,
what you want to do.
I guess
It
so.
says metallic writing surface on the back of this image. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more. For all things Paul, go to Thurrott.com. A lot of content coming your way on Thurrott.com. A lot of stuff. That's one of the first places I go to in the morning. A lot of people go to CNN. A lot of people go to Fox News. I go to Thurrott.com. That's how I start my day. I got to see Paul's beautiful face every single day. It keeps me motivated and keeps me going every day. Thurrott.com. You can follow us. We're everywhere podcasts are available. You could just put in What the Tech and subscribe. By the way, that is as important as funding us. If you go and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, on Google, on Spotify, I believe we're on Spotify now, on all the podcast applications, that goes a very long way with us. It helps us. And also, if you're on iTunes, give us a rating. Give us 5 stars. Rate us. That's also much appreciated. Guysfromqueens.com, gfknetwork.com. You could get the show there. It's archived there right after this. And we'll see you all next time. If you're watching live, stay tuned. We're going to continue. See you next time.